Welcome to this beginner's guide to Telerik Reporting. I am creating this video in response to some customers who have mentioned issues getting started with Telerik Reporting. Telerik Reporting is an embeddable solution that can exist entirely within your solution, whatever technology it is written in. Telerik Reporting uses microservices architecture with API layer delivering all the reports that are needed. Let us see how you can use Telerik Reporting with no fuss. Obviously, the first step would be to download Telerik Reporting tool. Now, one of the main things that you need to do as you're working with Telerik Reporting is to design and define your reports. This is done using a standalone report designer, and the output of this phase is going to be TRDP file. Step 2 for using Telerik Reporting would be to host our reporting service or the microservice that hosts the rendering of the Telerik report. Now this is done using .NET Core or .NET Framework. As you create this service, you will need to copy the output from the first step, which is define report, and place it in a location within your hosted reporting service. The final step to using Telerik Reporting is to display the report in the report viewer. The report viewer is available for various technologies, but we will see how we can use or display reports in simple HTML file. To begin with, let us see how to design the report using the report designer. The first thing I'd like to do is to look at the data source that we'll be working with. Now, the data source that we'll be working with is the very famous AdventureWorks database. As you can see, I have a local copy of AdventureWorks 2019 running on my machine. The query that is shown here is used to list all the sales that have happened in a sales territory. So you'll notice that I have two tables that have been joined. The first is sales order header and the second one is sales territory. And I've also included a flag to say where online order flag is 1. So this is an online purchase. So you'll notice here that we have the sales order ID. We have the order date, due date, sales order number, followed by the bill to address, ship to address, the exact amount of the individual sales invoice, the tax amount, and then the total due for this particular order. If you further scroll to the right, you'll notice we have joined on territory ID. So territory ID 6 is for Canada, and that has the region code, the group, which is the North America, Europe, Pacific, and so on and so forth. So I'm interested in finding out the amount of sales that has happened in any territory. So what has the sales been in Canada, France, North America's Northwest region, Australia, United Kingdom, Germany, and so on and so forth. And that's the report that we'll be designing to get this information. Let's bring in and start our report designer. So I've installed Telerik Reporting on my machine, and it's available under Program Files, followed by Progress and Telerik Reporting R3 2019, and under that you have the report design section. Now I'll be working simply with the report designer, and it does not require you to have Visual Studio or any other IDE to work with. This is a standalone report designer that can be directly used by business professionals to design their report. So as I start the report designer, there is the File, New option, and I can start with any one report. So at this time, how about I simply start with a table wizard. So let's start with this. Select a location to save our report, the one that we'll be generating. So to do that, I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop and call it the Adventure Works Reports. And I'm going to call this Sales by Territory. So that's the report definition that I have created, and now I have an empty report available right here. The first thing that I need to do is to create or connect the report with the data source. Now, the moment I say new data, I will have a new table wizard which allows me to choose a data source. I'll add a new data source, and we support multiple data sources. The one that I'm currently interested in is the SQL data source, but you will find object data source or JSON data source or web services data source being used quite often as well. So for now, I will just call it the SQL data source, and just to name it correctly, I will be calling it ADW data source. So SQL Adventure Works data source is what I'm going to name it. It's just a label. And the moment I do this, it asks me if there is an existing data connection I want to use, but I can start to build a new data connection. In this case, I'm going to be using the SQL client data provider because I know this is a SQL server that I'm connecting to. So I can build a connection string. That's the SQL client. I can say localhost, and I can provide the username and password, and go here and look at what are the databases. As you can see, AdventureWorks 2019 sample database is available. Test the connection and say OK for this. All right, so we'll move on and say next. Now, this is the option where we let you name this data connection. So currently it's called AdventureWorks 2019, but basically what I'm going to be calling this is as AdventureWorks 2019, let's say the connection string. Now, the reason why I need to name it in a proper way is I can configure a different connection string. Maybe you're moving from developer machine or developer database to a production database, and all that can be done without changing this report. Okay, so I will use this as the label. Remember this label because it is important. I can even take this 2019 off. Let's call this AdventureWorks connection string. And now we need to enter the select statement. Okay, so you remember the statement that we had written earlier. Let's go here and copy that in. I'm not going to be adding that online order, but let's see if this flies. And next, we can execute this query to get a sense of what all rows will be returned. So let's execute this query, and we see the rows that we expect to be there from the sales order header, followed by the fields from the territory table as well. Okay, so we are good. I can finish this, and you'll notice that we have now added a new data source, and all the fields are also listed here. So the part one of creating our data source is complete, we can move on, and now we can select the specific fields we want in this table. So the fields that I want in this table include, obviously, the total due amount. That is the one that is most important for me. I definitely want to also have maybe the order date, so I can pick up that, and there you can break it down further into the time components, if you will. So I'll put this whole order date in because I need to see that. Apart from that, I'm interested in knowing about the territory in which this is set up. So you have the country region code and the name of the country. All right, so let's reorganize this a little bit. So there is the name of the country, there is the order date, I have the total due and country region code if I so desire. So now we are set to create the report that will have total due, and based on we can create this report based on the country or the territory in which it was sold. All right, moving on. Just to think about it, just as I thought about it, maybe I want to add subtotal because this does not include the tax component, and maybe this is also something interesting. So the next step in the wizard allows me to add a custom design to this report. I'm okay with blue opal. This looks soothing enough. I can move on, and now I can say finish. So what has now happened is you'll notice that there is a report definition that has been generated. It currently contains three distinct sections, if you will. The first is the header section, and this is the one that will be repeated on every page of the report. Now, if you look at this section, there is a text box that has been inserted, and the properties are visible on the right side here. You'll notice that this particular field has the value defined as sales by territory. I can actually go ahead and improve the text a little bit if this allows me to do that. Okay, sales by territory, and I can also go ahead and modify the style if I want it to look a little different. So it's visible, the text is going to be 14 points. We have it in bold and Segoy font is what it is. The background currently is not there. I will simply go with gray. And this is the kind of format that it'll look like. There are borders and line style that you can also choose. All right. In terms of horizontal alignment, I think I am better served with center aligned. So let's see, once I do this much, what happens. You notice the whole band changes to gray. What I want to do is maybe extend it all down to the right and maybe reduce the size like that. Okay, so we are done with the header section. I can also reduce the size of the header like that. Now the second section here is the one that will repeat and will have all the data in there. So I can if I want to expand the size, I can do it this way. All right, so I can then further reduce the size of the repeated field. And finally, we have the page number or the header or the footer section. Now that we've designed the report, it's a simple one at this time, let's take a quick preview of this report. Now, what this will do is actually go out to the data source, which in this case is SQL Server, and pull in this report. And the report is rendered as visible. So you have the name, you have the order date, you have the subtotal, you have the total due, and the region or the country region code. mentioned here. Now I'm not quite happy with the name field here, so I can actually go ahead. It is not clearly defining what this is, so I'm happier with the name as territory name, and that is what should be visible here now. All right, I'm good here. Let's take a quick look at the preview. So we'll notice that this is exactly the output that I wanted, and I'm happy with this output at this time. I'll stop here working with the report designer, because now we need to display this report in an HTML viewer. The output of this report designer is a simple file that is now available in our desktop, and that's the one that we actually just defined, which is sales by territory. There we go, and our report definition is now available for use. The next step to displaying this report would be to host a reporting service application and copy this report in this directory. Now, the idea of having a reporting service is to simply host APIs that can render the reports on demand. I have copied in a templated project which I can now use to host my Telerik reports. You don't have to develop this application bespoke every time, because it follows a boilerplate template and it is available if you followed a few simple steps. Now, the application that I'm using is a simple .NET Core application, and this application can both be hosted on Windows as well as Linux. Just so that you know, this application has been developed and compiled using Visual Studio. So this is how the project looks like. Even if you are a Java developer or a PHP developer, you don't have to worry about this .NET Core project at all. All I'm going to be doing is to do a build for this report so that it runs or builds successfully and has all the dependencies included. Now, to see if my reporting service is hosted correctly, I'll just run it in IIS Express or my local web server. So it's just getting started, and the web on the website that is displayed has localhost page can't be found, because this is an API. API response is expected at the endpoint API, and to verify that your reporting service is correctly installed, you can browse to this URL, which is reports formats, and this will tell you what all formats does the reporting service currently support. Now, the URL here is important because it gives us the location where the reports are going to be available. Now that we have verified that the reporting service is currently running successfully, I'll go back to our folder, select the report that we had created using the report designer, and place it within a location of the project, which is under the folder reports. Now, it is not mandatory to store everything under reports. It is the structure of the solution that has set this up. So once I set this up in my reports folder, this report is ready to be served, and this concludes the second part of our report deployment. The final part of our report rendering or report use is to display the report in a report viewer, and this is less complex than it sounds. So what does that mean? I can browse back to my folder in which I have set up this application, and I have this sample index.html file that I'm now going to open with simple notepad and nothing more. So as you will notice, this is a simple HTML5 page. You will notice one script that has been included is jQuery, and it uses a few references to Kendo UI's CSS files, and a final script which is the JavaScript that's meant to render the Telerik report viewer. Okay, some default styling, and within the body you will notice there is a div created which is report viewer, and this is the div that we will transform into a Telerik report viewer. Okay, so now we are selecting this report viewer using jQuery, and the service URL needs to be updated with the URL that was currently there. It is using HTTP localhost. So I'm just going to add that part. All right, so that's the URL that we have used basically for our locally hosted report, but this could easily be running on any other website or location as well. All right, so the name, the report, now we need to enter the name of the report. If you go back to the AdventureWorks, and in the reports we had copied, we are calling it sales by territory.trdp. So that's all that I need to put in here. So it's sales by territory trdp. And currently we are not using any parameters, so I will leave it as empty. And there are certain parameters that I can also use. For now, we are good. And this is all that you need to do to create and render a report. The final step to displaying the index.html would be to have all the required scripts and CSS available with or close to index.html. Now I know all of these are available within this project at the location, so I can add a new folder, call it www.root, which can be used to render all my HTML files, and copy the index.html right there. So now I have index.html available within the project www.root. All I now need to do is simply go to the URL. So now our report viewer has come up, and this is excellent news. However, there is an exception which says that the error has occurred while processing and it is unable to connect to the database. The thing that is needed is to go into our project, open up the settings, and change the connection string. So if you remember, this was AdventureWorks connection string, which was the name of the connection string that we had added. Let's run this again. Okay, you can see now the report has rendered successfully, and this is going to be a long report as is visible here. Now this report is good for printing as well, and it will automatically create the number of pages it needs to have as you go ahead and print this report. You can also export this report in various formats like PDF, Excel worksheet, PowerPoint, and Word document. All right, so we've seen how we can work with this report and render this report quite easily without having to deal with any amount of development.